This video made possible by Killer Visual Strategies. Visit killervisualstrategies.com.
So I'm Alice Chen from Accelerator Life Science Partners. I will actually be kind of a little bit of an oddball out in the sense that
I'm supposed to be on a panel right now. Good to see you. Kirsten's here.
Yeah. Well, we're just going to be quiet and listen. So Life Science Partners, we're actually coming from the therapeutics side, working toward the tech arena. We're mostly in therapeutics and related technologies, and we are starting to look into using tech to facilitate drug development and other aspects. We will talk a little bit about that throughout the discussion. So go ahead.
Yeah, great. There's Kirsten. You had a hot mic on.
Oh, sorry.
So Corey Schmid, I am a general partner at Seven Peaks Ventures, and actually we are based in Oregon and invest across the West, Pacific Northwest specifically. I spend a lot of time up here in Seattle, and my expertise is in healthcare, digital health, health tech, and I also serve as an innovation advisor to healthcare systems. So I sit on the board of a hospital system and look at the inside and hear what the real problems are, and then bridge that gap with new innovations and startups on the outside. So I think we're looking at it.
Okay, we've already done the, you've already introed
A
yourself.
little bit of a 20-second.
Yeah. How about your intro?
So I've been doing venture for the last 20 years. Most recently at Spring Rock, I was with the Silicon Valley Fund as well as 2 regional funds. Actually, pre-Madrona is when I started in venture. But anyway, my most recent fund, Spring Rock, we invest in the convergence of healthcare and technology. So let's jump into some questions on this. Okay, let's jump in. Lots of venture investors and entrepreneurs have jumped into the healthcare sector over the last 5 years. Oh, sorry. Here we go.
We got another. We just thought you were having cocktails already.
I was really excited when I was asked to moderate this panel. As I said, Terry Myerson is on this panel, who's the former head of Windows. So excited he's part of this, and why? So why don't you jump in and give it? They've already given a little bit about their background. Why don't you give a little bit about why you're here and who you're with now?
So I apologize to everyone being late, but see, I've been out of Microsoft for about a year, and I joined the Madrona Venture Group. And the pattern I saw when I joined Madrona Ventures was there were some companies that were coming through that were right at this intersection of data sciences and life sciences, and they were really great entrepreneurs and addressing big market opportunities. But it was interesting, they were talking life sciences, and the computing-oriented people in the room were like, gosh, that's a new vocabulary, and I'm not entirely comfortable with it. At the same time, when they would talk to life sciences firms that were pursuing therapeutics, they were like, well, this is not a therapeutic you're building. And so I just found it super interesting, and been spending the last year getting to know that ecosystem, the entrepreneurs in that ecosystem, and here I am.
Awesome.
I'm catching my breath.
Lots of venture investors and entrepreneurs have jumped into the health tech sector over the past 5 years with a huge passion, but many have jumped out because once they're immersed in it, they realize there's a huge difference between traditional technology and healthcare due to the of how hard it is to scale with the go-to-market and the sales cycle. So what are a few pieces of advice you'd give an entrepreneur of milestones a venture investor would like to see when you're to say yes at the Series A or seed stage?
Sure, maybe I'll take a first crack. So coming from the therapeutics side, definitely have someone on the healthcare sector throughout your organization, and that's on the board, in the management team, and also the operations team. And the reason is that these are people with expertise to bridge, who can speak the language and also open doors. Some of the challenges that we see in terms of using health tech in the broader healthcare system is scaling, and also the understanding of biology, and finally kind of the adaptation of the technology and integration of new things into an industry I would say is pretty heavy on inertia. And so we need people to speak the language so that we can bridge the two sectors.
I guess I'd look more on the business side and say, we were talking about this the other day, that especially in the Pacific Northwest, to be honest, there's not a lot of straight health tech investors, right? You've got a lot of folks that are crossing over. Our fund is one that invests in a broad range of enterprise. You're coming from two different sides. The metrics are not the same. And you're going to get investors who are looking for standard SaaS metrics. They come into healthcare and go, holy crap, you haven't done anything. The sales cycle is really long, can be 12, 18 months. Yeah. So you've really got to understand those stakeholders early on, because by the time you might get in at their door, if you've got it wrong, good luck starting over. You've run out of money. I mean, it's really challenging. So really understanding the problem you're solving, whether that's within a healthcare system, if it's for pharma, if it's for an employer, insurer, and that you're getting to the right folks, and finding some wins and reiterating and pivoting along the way, because if you wait for 18 months, it's going to be really hard to start again. So I think the metrics are different. It's not, I want to see $1 million or $2 million in revenue. I do. And number of customers, it's going to be a little different. So you have to do some of that education up front and make sure the investors that are with you have both the healthcare expertise and the tech expertise if you're doing both, because I think both of those are going to be really valuable in the long run. So it's not as cut and dry as you might see in some other traditional tech investing.
So I would add to that. I mean, I agree with both what you both said. I think the thing that I've found really fascinating in this space is there's some science, some real unique science to some of these companies. Where, in tech we see great discussions of team and market opportunity and perhaps a unique approach. But here there's potentially a really unique insight into how the world works, a real scientific, for lack of a better word, invention. And if there's intellectual property protection on that invention, I think you could potentially build a great company around it. And so it's the one thing I see very unique in this space from the companies that I've spent time with has been, what is the science? What is the unique scientific insight? And potentially, how can we protect that science? Whereas in software, I feel like we've given up on intellectual property protection in many ways. We expect every unique insight to be re-implemented within some period of time, so we look for data-driven moats and things like that. Here, there still is the idea of a scientific insight that's protected through intellectual property and a moat that's very different from the technology space. And so I've been trying to say, what is the unique science that you might build a company around?
On that, and maybe you guys already touched on this, but there's a couple classic mistakes, right, that an entrepreneur might make, or that you would just say, God, I wish I could have told them. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that's just sort of a classic mistake that you just say, don't do this?
Don't do this.
Probably lots of things.
Maybe do this in a way. I think we talked a little bit before. Be ready to articulate your differentiation, and this applies to the therapeutics world as well. How is your technology different from other people? If you can't say that, if you can't articulate it within 30 seconds and let your grandma understand it, probably you need to rethink about what you're trying to do. So that's number one.
I think picking your team feels like you're going to go through hell together,
yeah.
And hopefully look back on it in 10 years as the good old days that you went through hell together. But if you have the right team, I feel like you can solve a lot of other problems. And so finding a set of complementary people that, you don't have to be best friends, but a set of complementary people that can really have that sort of mutual respect to build on each other, I feel like that's the foundation of really any great enterprise.
Over the past 5 to 10 years, when Microsoft or Google said they were jumping in the healthcare sector, the people in the know in the entrepreneurial venture community sort of shrugged it off and said, yeah, it's sort of a side thing, not that important, we're not worried. But now it's interesting that the real push and strategic effort that Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon are doing in the healthcare sector. And things may be a little different. So for you, both from an entrepreneurial perspective as well as when you think about when you're investing, pre-investment and then post-investment from a partnership perspective, is there any one or two of those that you think about from a competitive perspective, and then on the post-investment side that maybe partnership, but who are you most worried about?
Worried about? I guess I'd look at them, I'd say, okay, if you think of the four, you could probably even add Facebook in, but let's just put them aside. You'll probably have a lot to say on Microsoft, but Google's all about your data. Amazon, they own the supply chain. They know what I'm eating now. They know what pills I'm taking. They're getting into durable medical equipment. Pretty savvy. Microsoft's infrastructure. And Apple really, I mean, we're all carrying a phone in our pocket, so they're following us around. They all could be scary. But if you think about what they do well and where they play, I think that's what you have to think about as an entrepreneur, as a healthcare system maybe, and as an investor is, what do they do really well and what should I not try and do? Don't be a search engine. Google's nailed it. Don't try and be Amazon. But where could you go to them and say, can you be my supply chain if I do this piece really well? And then on the acquisition side, I mean, they're gobbling up a lot of things quietly and some more public. So I don't think we should be scared of them. I think we should be savvy enough to understand what they're going to crush a little company at and where you could be additive to some of the things they're doing. I think Amazon is, I don't know, maybe they'll get too big for their own good, but they've got some really interesting insights. Apple's going into a whole lot of different areas where maybe we didn't see them going the last few years. So,
I mean, compared to if you're investing in software infrastructure right now, you're looking over your shoulder for these guys every day. It's not the same at all. I mean, you can speculate, oh, maybe they'll pivot in this way and maybe do something, but they're not. This is not front and center, I don't think. I mean, Apple's probably building devices that collect a lot of data in a very valuable way, but I don't think at the others this is front and center for them. I think they're just looking at the amount of data generated is potentially terabytes per, it is terabytes per sequence. Before you get into doing proteomics and doing terabytes per hour or per day. And so if you're a cloud computing infrastructure provider, there probably is no market that will produce as much data as health. Mm-hmm. So if you're in the software data space and you're thinking long term, just some way to get your arms around the terabytes, petabytes, zettabytes of data that are going to come from health is critical. And I don't know what's guiding Google, but I think that's what's inside Microsoft's mind, is how to add value to all that data. But I don't feel like people are worried about them in the same way they are if you're investing in some sort of software management tool or enterprise management tool where you're just trying to figure out what they're doing next.
They might actually be a great acquisition partner, and at the end of the day, develop something that is adaptable, that can be integrated into existing system. We have been doing that in therapeutics all our life, and so we'll probably do the same thing when it comes to health tech, which is build something that can feed into the giants, because that's probably more viable.
And I think there's as patients, I think we still trust the doctors. We still trust the community clinic more so than we're going to trust Google to treat us, or Amazon. I think they're going after their own employees. That's really smart. If you're Amazon, if you're Apple, treat your own people. But I still think there's plenty of opportunity to innovate and look at them as collaborators. Just don't try to compete with them in certain areas.
Can I ask a question to the panelists as well? Do you find it possible in 10 years' time that, for instance, Google come up with a comprehensive solution for healthcare system and just say, okay, you hold on to your point solutions and your decentralized systems for another 7 years, but at that time we're just going to take it over?
I don't even know what a comprehensive solution for healthcare would mean. I mean, it's one of these things where there's caring for people that are sick, and then there's discovering ways to cure people, and those are two very, very...
Yeah, we'll fix the curing part, but everything else...
Well, if you solve the curing tomorrow, we don't need the other stuff. So I don't know But I mean, so much of the spend in healthcare is on the taking care of the sick, which gets into, empathy becomes the primary value proposition, not necessarily science. And then, I don't know. I imagine everyone will be investing here, but I don't know what comprehensive healthcare is. Maybe I should ask our politicians. I don't.
I mean, there's interoperability regulations and pushes now, and it's who's going to build that platform. I don't know if Google's going to do that. I don't know that that's what they want to do. Build the someone else is going to do that, and they want the data out of it. So I don't know. Could be wildly wrong.
If we go along that vein, what are 1 to 2 areas of investment that you're looking for? I mean, that you're excited about. A couple areas you're excited about or you're looking for an investment in.
Sure. So from our point of view, we are much more very interested in, for instance, AI-assisted drug development. We're interested in patient segmentation based on digital data. We are interested in a smart way to design clinical trials and also optimization of clinical trials. So those are the areas that we're interested in, especially through the drug development value chain, if you will.
What stage are you? Early?
Early. So we're very early stage. Accelerator per se, we invest a lot of times straight out of universities. So we form companies straight out of universities, and so on the drug development side, we will also be looking into early stage platforms, looking for instance, target identification, drug moiety design, etc.
I was going to say, for us, it's the clinical trial phase and companies that are going to go, that's not where we're investing. So I would say something that has a scientific insight combined with big data and doesn't require a clinical trial, or you would then think about a partner for the clinical trial. That was where we would go. Just because you look at the economics of clinical trials, it's a very different investment profile. But if you have a scientific insight that brings with it some big data, we're very interested.
Or is there any company you just invest in, or some sector that you're hot on trying to find a company in?
That we're looking?
Yeah.
I mean, one's a great example of kind of all the stars aligning. A company we're invested in is Cricket Health in San Francisco. So Cricket is trying to change the paradigm for chronic kidney disease, dialysis, and the regulations are shifting. It's bipartisan. Everyone goes, oh my gosh, dialysis is horrible. We have to help these people not crash into these clinics and get treated terribly. They're super expensive. But they're doing a tech-wrapped service. So they're going to do in-home, they're going to do virtual, they're going to do clinics, and then all the educational tools so that you realize you have choices. That's kind of a beautiful model where the regulations are working, their tech, their services, their subscription. That kind of complexity is really hard to invest in, but it's actually what you're looking for. So we have folks on our team who are really deep in tech, and then folks in the industry. We like workflow problems, remove waste out of the system. We're definitely not device therapeutic. We're going to be more once that's, how do you deliver care, and how do we, the triple aim sounds so trite, but I don't think we've accomplished it yet. So if we can find those solutions that are doing that, that's of interest.
Terry or Alice, are there ones that you've recently invested in you're excited about?
There's two companies I'd love to talk about, but I can't. So that's one thing about this space, where there's more stealthy stuff than I find in tech too. But one that I'm excited about, the Madrona invested in, is named Ovation. It's they built a lab information system. So you think about, typically your doctor doesn't run the test themselves, they send it out. They built a lab information system, which is building this data asset of genome sequences with clinical data. And so the idea, we're now able to sequence your genome, but we don't have necessarily able to correlate this terabytes of data from your genome back to various things that are actually going on, with your body. And so they're building that data asset, and so they're not analyzing the data asset, they're simply building the data asset. And I think that will be very exciting to see how that data asset is used.
We're late in the public market cycle, and private valuations have continued to creep up to a stage where, companies with less than 5 million revenue have valuations of 50 to 100 million at their B, C, D stages. Do you believe in big rounds when they're offered? Should founders take that, or should you be more thoughtful about that? What's your latest thought around how health tech valuations have creeped up to a point where the public markets don't really match the private markets?
Sure.
Yeah, Corey, you want to start?
Oh, sure. It's, are we in a bubble? There's always someone's always in a bubble.
Yeah,
one of these industries is always.
And I would also say, maybe on that question, the advice you'd give to the entrepreneur who's making the decision.
We typically, I gave cricket as an example, which is in Silicon Valley, but we typically invest outside. I'm looking at the CEO of Amplion. Amanda was just up here. Phenomenal regional markets. Seattle, believe it or not, is still probably a regional market. Portland. And I think they are more right-sized for the money you need. I was just out in the hallway talking to someone going, God, you give a company all this money and they feel the need to spend it. And in healthcare, you need it to grow and to get to the point where you can scale, but your revenues are probably going to lag a lot. We've seen it in almost every investment in our space, which I have to keep educating my own partners who are typically enterprise and tech investors. It doesn't mean that they're failing. You can see the ones that are. There's plenty of those. I think you take the money you need. Is there going to be a slowdown? Is it going to be harder to fundraise? Probably. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It weeds out maybe the companies that get all this early stage money that don't really have a business model. They're a point solution. So I think it's a challenge. And I think you're going to see more investors coming in who are strategics, who are going to mark up the price early. And that can be dangerous because then venture investors like us go, that's too expensive. You're not worth $80 million yet. So is it a perfect formula? No. But I think we have to be wary of overinflating and then watching these companies go public. Lantern's an example. And then they don't really have a business model. They don't have strong margins. And the public markets kind of vomit all over them. So.
I know in life sciences is a little different of how you invest, but how do you solve that problem?
So we invest in milestones. Solving is too heavy of a word. We try to invest to milestones and inflection points.
Yeah.
So we predetermine the meaningful inflection points, and then we finance to that point, no less, no more. And then let the market take it from there. That way it solves a few problems. It is not the sexiest thing to do because then our rounds are not large. It's not going to make the headline on Fierce Bio or some such thing, although some of them did. But at least that kind of discipline does guard against some of the things that we're seeing on the market.
I mean, I think at some level it's got to come down to how big is the TAM for what you're investing in. If the TAM is big, then a $50 million valuation,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe it makes sense. If the TAM is $50 million, $50 million valuation doesn't make sense. And I think that seeking the big market, I think really, if you can get that, these valuations, you can it might work. But if the company's going to become $100 million, you can see, this company could get acquired for $100 million, then these valuations don't make sense. So I think that's picking the big markets. I think that's and then if it works, these valuations don't, whether it's a $40 million valuation or a $70 million valuation, it's not going to matter if it works, and it's not going to matter if it doesn't work. But, finding those big markets is hard.
Someone in this audience asked me to ask the question that happens a lot in health tech investing, which is there are many funds out there that will say, I will co, but I won't lead. And you got to have that lead to get an investor. And specifically in tech, there's lots of corporate money out there, right? There's pharma corporate money, and there's many hospital system corporate money. a few of them lead, but most of them co. How do you, if you're thinking about sort of that Series A or Series B realm where you're working and part of your syndicate might be one of these corporate investors, how do you provide advice to the founders when they're thinking about that?
So what I've seen is we'll decide what we're willing to invest at and at what post-money valuation we're willing to invest at. We will decide what governance we're willing to invest with, so with the board seats. And then if the founder wants to bring in additional capital, that's fantastic. We support the decision making, but we need to make a decision. What do we think is a good investment? What is a good valuation? What is a governance structure? So like hypothetically, Madrona will take a board seat. Madrona will invest with a, pick your number, $50 million post-money valuation. We decide we'll put in $5 million at that valuation. And then if the founder says, I want to raise 8, and I really am picking arbitrary numbers, it's like, okay, if you had those co-investors line up, but the investment we would like to make is this for this percent with this governance. So I think us being clear about that actually kind of empowers them to then try and bring others aboard. And then the others and those co-investors know, okay, this is what the board will be and this is what the valuation will be if I'm a co-investor on that round. Yeah. But I think clarity helps the founder, helps the co-investors.
What's your opinion, Connie?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the stage, and I think it can be dangerous to have a strategic set the price. They're just not as price sensitive as the rest of the market, and whether or not they have a seat, right? What is their position? You have to be careful with strategic sometimes because it might be their strategy for the year, and it changes next year. Your strategy is, I've got my house in the second mortgage, and I've got early stage investors who are in the foxhole with me, and that's different. If they are additive, if it is strategic to, knocking down an insurer and you get a United or Cigna involved, it could be game changing. I think it has to be on the right terms, and I think governance is absolutely critical. And if you can get a lead elsewhere and then they come in and are additive, I think it's outstanding. But you have to be price sensitive. I've had companies come to me and go, I took all this strategic money, I have 9 board members, I have 0 revenue, my product isn't to market yet, I need a VC to come set the terms for my next round. I'm like, I am not touching that with a 10-foot pole. But they raised $30, $40 million. So I think it's a matter of timing and why you're bringing that person in. And sometimes what we've seen is they go, you give us the terms. The CEO goes, you want me to give you terms? And so as a board, if they're the right, it's a weird situation right now in healthcare. these hospital systems are like, we should have a $100 million fund, okay?
I was at Corporate Investor 2 years ago.
It's different, right?
It's not, you're not, it's not your job to help grow a small company. So, if you gives you access, builds you a network.
Yep.
But I think especially for a small company, I think it would be a governance mistake to have them lead.
Alice is a little different with pharma. How do you feel about it from a pharma perspective?
Different, yeah. Definitely on the corporate venture side, their incentives and their roles are different from a VC investor. At the same time, I think echoing what was said before, which is what is the value add? For us, we look for investors with value add. And for that, pharma companies, there are things that's a little bit more tricky to deal with, but at the same time, they have the depth of science and also understanding of the clinical trials and also the general market. And so for that, we work with their strength. And we have actually been helped and gotten a lot of assistance from our pharma strategic. So, understand the value add. If there is value, go for it. If there is no value, it might be too much trouble for what it's worth.
Olympic Venture Partners, one of the original VCs of Seattle, used to have a fun tab on their website that said, and where they'd say, here's the companies that we missed or passed on and we wish we hadn't. So for each one of these panelists, even if you didn't see it, versus that you passed on it, what are one or two that you wish were investors in that are still private?
Well, in this space, Google them. No, but the company that I admire a lot, Adaptive Biotech, I just love what they do. I love how it's based on some, real science for sequencing the immune system. I love how they're building all this ground truth data, and they're now reasoning against that data to look for a universal diagnostic, which is a massive market. So there's a lot to admire about Adaptive here locally. It fits that pattern of scientific insight, big data asset, huge market that I really admire. And they're in Seattle, which I think is very important, at least for our fund. And so that one stands out to me.
One that is on the other stage, which is where probably most of the people are, and it's not health tech, it's Convoy, which I think is going to be a big hit. For healthcare and health tech, there's one I don't know if folks really even know. It kind of got popped quickly, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's Glimpse, bought by Apple. I like what they're doing. It's this, we all talk about giving the patient power over their data. It's going to happen at some point. I think maybe they have a head start, so I'm curious to watch what they're doing. The other one I really admire, the CEO, she's outstanding, is Evidation Health. And so you probably, I'm more on the clinical trial side. The reason I think that's so interesting, Deb Kilpatrick is the CEO, is it's looking at human behavior. And that was kind of my background. It's not just the drugs you're taking and your biomarkers and your saliva and your blood, and it's how can we add to that? What are you doing in your everyday life? And I think the pairing of the science and clinical data with our behavioral data in drug trials and outcomes is really imperative. And they're getting bigger, but I love their approach and the way that they're engaging patients in the future of how they can improve outcomes.
Yeah. And for us, we're a fairly newcomer coming from the pharma side, and so there are things that we would love to learn more about, more so than invest in. So inference, benevolent AI, those are the kind of technologies that we would pay more attention to and see how that's going to fit into what we do. Both of them had pharma collaborations to date, and there are a lot of other companies in that space as well. And Novartis just had a collaboration with Microsoft. So it would be interesting to tease out what components of Microsoft is providing pharma companies such as Novartis. I think for that particular technology, that particular collaboration is on drug development, on imaging, segmentation, et cetera. And so, what are the things would be most helpful for our industry? And those would be the ones that we track.
Health tech is broad, right? There's solutions for health systems, providers, solutions for employers, solutions for consumers, solutions for pharma. Sometimes companies do a mix of it. Are there any business model go-to-market strategies that you focus and prefer on? And are there any that you've decided after experience that you avoid?
Consumers are scary. We're so finicky. We can get apps for free. It's tough. It's more money. It's really hard. There's a lot of brain damage in that. If you do it well, those are, I think, some of the best breakthroughs in healthcare because it touches us directly. But we primarily look at B2B. But I think you have to eventually think about the consumers maybe being, they're part of the stakeholder chain. But direct to consumer or folks who are doing both, good luck. Talk about fundraising, you're going to need a lot more money. It's just really hard. So we tend to use our enterprise experience and bring that to healthcare.
Pharma and payers seem to be the biggest two sources of capital. There's providers that are consumers, but the two places that I've seen large sources of capital are the 30 or so companies that actually pay for our healthcare once you get past through all the middlemen, and pharma, which, when they have a discovery, they're able to monetize it quite well. And so I think being able to track back any monetization to the people paying for healthcare, even if it's this decision is made somewhere else in the chain or pharma, at least that logically makes sense to me. It is a more complicated, I think, business model world than software, but those are the two groups that seem to have money, disposable money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So yeah, we're much more tailored to the biopharma side, and I think the statistics is that more than $2 billion goes into every approved drugs, and so there's a lot of inefficiencies that we can help to improve, and health tech may just be the solution, one of the solutions that can help us do that. And as we move into more of a value-based, outcome-based cost structure, I think the whole healthcare system is scratching our head in terms of how do we better segment patient populations, how do we better choose our treatment options so as to produce the best outcome as opposed to more of a non-discriminative treatment option. Mm-hmm. And so those are the things that we will focus on going forward.
Yeah, charging doctors, I think, is hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
They can't get reimbursement from the payer. It's going to be hard. Consumers, we pay when we get sick. Typically, we don't pay for things that prevent us from getting sick. And so I think it just comes back to those payers and pharma.
You know, having been in VC for a while, you always go back and forth of market, management. For you guys, what type of management teams do you look for? Sort of, if you're investing at seed stage, or if it's it's a little different. But what needs to be there, and what could you add?
I think in this market, scientific insight is critical. It's different than this is a market, especially if you get on the pharma side. This is really about what happens when you put this chemical inside this super complicated biochemical thing that we don't understand, and that's very unique in this space. And Madrona invests across a wide spectrum of technologies, but I've seen some investments we've made in the novel material space, which has some real science to it, but you really need some founders that appreciate the science. I think that's unique.
Yeah, we're more on the business of healthcare, whether that's with pharmaceutical companies getting intelligence to develop drugs or delivering telehealth to systems. I think you need, it's a balance. You look at folks who have, and I hope not to offend anyone, who've been inside the walls of a healthcare system their whole lives. They're very narrow-minded, but they understand who to talk to and how to get Joe to sign your purchase agreement, and then get the IT group to add you. So there's that kind of inside the walls, and you're even seeing this happen with big healthcare and other groups. They're hiring outside in. They're hiring chief innovation officers that don't walk and talk the same way as the CEO. So we really look for, you've got to understand the business. If you don't understand the commercial business of healthcare, you're kind of doomed. You're different than the life science side. So we want clinical expertise, but we also really want business chops to understand how you manage through that. And I think you need to know the regulatory landscape. What's going on with government? What's going to happen with policy? Tech alone is not going to solve it.
I don't know what's going on in government. What do we think?
I think we can all use that. Families. Because there's a lot, they're leading out with what the next thing is going to be required, and I think they're looking for people to give input and feedback and show what's going to, I don't know. So I think you have to have a dynamic team.
Yes.
Or you're.
Alice, is there something that's a little different from the life science?
Actually, I completely agree. We need to have a multidisciplinary team. On the pharma side, we're very deep on science and very deep on expertise, but at the same time, because of that, we have some self-imposed limitations that needs to be broken out of. And so, and people start to do that. Even pharma companies that we work with, they start to have multidisciplinary folks to start thinking about what are different things that we can do. How can we approach the same problem through a different lens, through a different approach? And I think that will work out well for us.
I know the panel before was all about machine learning, so I saved this question for the last. But there's utilization of AI for drug development, back office automation, clinical improvement. There's been a lot of hype versus reality. Is there any area that you're focused on with AI in healthcare that you are excited about? either within your portfolio company you think is actually working, or something that you've identified a sector you want to go after? Anyone?
I mean, this is not really a direct answer to your question, but as I've spent time in this space, you talk to these people that have used, they basically grew up using Excel as their analysis tool. They literally would create histograms and line charts based upon all the data collected from the various experiments in Excel. And now you're getting terabytes and terabytes of data. You just can't plot that on a line chart. And so I think everything in this space is going to be using big data techniques, which are somehow now all being classified as AI in some way. But this big data is going to be just part of every aspect of healthcare, within the next, now forward. Because otherwise, there's no other tool we have to distill these terabytes of data per incident.
For us, we start to look into treatment prediction algorithms. So through two lenses. One is, how do you identify the high responders in patient populations so as to target a limited patient population and see the effect? And the other side is, for a certain population of patients, how do you identify the optimal treatment regimen? How do we figure out the combination treatments for a particular set of patients? And that will come into a combination of a vast amount of omics data, so genomics, proteomics, and other data that we couldn't afford to have just 5 years ago. And so those are the new frontiers that we're looking into now. The caution in there is that how far is biology now relative to before? Is biology catching up sufficiently so that we can do this kind of analysis, or are we not there yet? So those are the areas that we're looking into.
I think this is the last question. Do you have anything?
No, just two things. Radiology.
Yep.
We've got an investor. I mean, my gosh, why not let machines at least get started, right? So I think early detection of cancers. The other one, I think it's interesting, just data. I was talking to a chief data officer of a big healthcare system. She's like, we have so much data. We don't need more data. We're going to keep getting it, but we need to start to figure out what to do with it. So that's really, I think, the just reasonable applications of making sense of the data that we have decades and decades of data on ourselves already. And so finding ways to leverage technology to bring those insights to the surface in a usable way for all the stakeholders.
All right, I think we're done. If there's any burning question that somebody wanted to hear from one of the VCs up here and did not, I think that they would take the question. And if not, then yeah.
Like in December, Google kind of won the protein folding cast competition, and that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's like a real scandal. It really is, because exactly for that application, it was. I mean, I experienced it myself. People were discounting the ability of deep learning to do anything useful. They had kind of in that space, and I mean, this should really make everyone kind of like. I mean, it's already doing it, but I'm just saying that should really be my question is. It's a big deal, but my question is, can you build a company around it? It's public. Anyone can use it. Anyone can do it. I mean, it's just kind of a tool.
Well, there's actually several. At the UW, there's an Institute for Protein Design that has actually spun out several companies. I want to say around.
They're great. They're all using the other method of doing it, which is simulation. This is a method that they actually said would never work, that kind of won their own competition. So these are all David Baker's companies. They're great. He's amazing. But what's interesting is that the thinking at that time about this is October, last time I asked, was that this will never work, it doesn't do anything, and you have to hand code all these things. And then 2 months later, after hearing a speech from someone pretty high up in one of those companies, this happens. And it's just interesting, like a lot of the tools that were used to look for cats and pictures because they were using readily interpretable problems that had a huge audience of researchers that could look at it, don't have to know anything. I mean, everyone knows what a cat looks like. They built some tools that, when you turn them around and use them on more interesting problems, they're having a real effect. And I think I don't know how to monetize it. I don't know how to, I could say, oh, I'm going to start a company and use Google's tools. I mean, that's a real problem. I don't even know how to do that. Some people are doing it. Cluster One is a company that's close to that, and they kind of make these models usable for a lot of people. But it's almost like you need the experience of working on dumb problems, where the problem is not that interesting, but its implementation is hard.
Well, a couple times people have referenced what is Google or Microsoft doing in healthcare. I mean, I think what you're seeing is that machine learning or AI, this idea of finding very complex optimizations of a very complex or multivariate problem. I mean, that is the breakthrough which machine learning has given to every industry, whether it is trucking that was mentioned or protein folding, equilibriums. That's what machine learning is doing. You give it a highly multivariate problem. What are the optimal points of thing? And so Google found this protein folding problem and applied their really leading technologies to this challenge and won this competition. In terms of, how do you monetize protein design? I mean, that is the entire therapeutics industry, is building novel proteins to go, modify our bodies. So, but of course, we don't know how the body works entirely, so we can't design all the proteins. We don't know what all the proteins should do. But I mean, that is the science of biology.
Yeah, there are a few ways that we typically leverage platform technologies in the realm of biopharma therapeutics development. Find an asset for it, or develop an asset out of the platform, whether it's a protein therapeutics for protein replacement, whether it's a assay platform to, for instance, if they have a way to express certain desirable receptors on the surface of the cell, that could be a platform all by itself for target identification, for drug development capabilities. And so we usually, if there is a fantastic platform, we usually find a problem to let the platform solve. And so develop an asset to go for it, and then the rest will follow. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Hey, thanks again to all the panelists. So we at Regents are very, very proud to be part of this vibrant healthcare innovation community in Seattle. We deeply care about the consumer, so it's been very inspiring to hear from all the panelists today, all the sessions. Thank you to all of our sponsors, all of our guests, and all of our staff that makes this community stronger. Thank you. We wish you the best, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.